The Porsche 911 GTS loses on average $7,900 per year, and as you are about to see, this makes it the best value for money 911 you can buy right now. What's up YouTube, and welcome to a new video. So in the last few months I showed you the depreciation curve for many different 911 models. For the base model, the S and the Turbo, we covered all modern generations. For the GT3 however, we only looked at the 991 generation. The GTS is however still missing from this list, and as you probably saw from the title of the video, that is going to change today. And as always, we will structure the video in a few steps so we don't get lost in the numbers. And that means that we will first have a look at the GTS market and some general market numbers. After this, we looked then at the different depreciation numbers, such as the depreciation per year and per 1000 miles driven. We will also look at various market splits to see if certain market segments are keeping their value better than others. In the third step, I will show you then why the 911 GTS offers the best value for money, as I will compare the depreciation curve of the GTS to the one of the normal 911, GT3 and Turbo. Finally, at the end of the video, we will also have a look at the depreciation leaderboard to see how the GTS compares to all of the other cars I've analyzed on the channel. Before we start with step number 1 though, please remember that you can comment a car which you would like to see analyzed down below in the comment section. And while you're at it, please remember to support the channel by smashing that like button. Now let's start with the first step, which was the GTS market. That is appearing now on your screen, and you can see that we have the model year on the horizontal axis and the price on the vertical axis. You can also see that each car is represented by a bubble and that the price is listed in US dollars. This graph is namely based on the US market. Now first off, you can see that the market looks a bit different than the one for other 911 models. The GTS was namely only introduced in 2011, and it was introduced with the aim to bridge the gap between the GT3 and the Carrera S. Now if you look at some reviews of the GTS, then you will also find that it succeeded quite well in this. The GTS namely offers an excellent mix between sportiness and daily usability. It was received so well that Porsche decided to continue the GTS range in the 991 generation. Now in total, there are 115 cars for sale, and the GTS tends to cost you around $114,000. And for this, you get a car with 11.5 thousand miles. Also, you most likely get a white or black car, as these are the most popular colors. The skittle colors such as red, orange, green and blue are a lot more rare. Now if you look at the prices, then you can see that the variation is large. Prices start at around $60,000 but go up all the way to $210,000. At the top end of the price range you will however find these special editions such as the Rennsport Reunion and the Club Coupe. And exactly because these are special editions, I excluded them from all of the graphs and numbers in the remainder of this video. Now let's draw a depreciation curve in this graph and have a look to the depreciation per year. That is now appearing on your screen, and you can see that in blue we have the depreciation curve. I also cleaned up the market slightly so that only new cars are included in model year 2019. This gives us a cleaner curve. Now as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, the average depreciation per year is around $7,900. And as you can see from the shape of the curve, it is key to interpret this as an average number. It namely depends very much on the age of a car. If we look for example to the drop in the first year, then we can see that this is the highest with around $30,000 or 20%. When the car ages, this absolute number decreases, and you can see that for the 997 generation, the depreciation is completely gone. One other interesting thing which you can see in this graph is that for some model years, there are a few outliers at the top end of the price range. These cars over here are priced significantly higher than the rest of the market, and it almost seems as if the depreciation curve doesn't apply to them. Now most likely it doesn't come as a surprise that these are the cars which are almost brand new and have a mileage which is way below the market average. Now if you know your Porsches, then you also know that this picture doesn't tell the full story. There are namely many variations in the GTS market. We can split the market for example by transmission type, by generation and by roof type. So let's have a look at each of these splits. And these splits are by the way based on the full data set. So that means that I didn't do the cleaning I talked earlier about. Now if we start with the transmission type, then we can see that the curve for the manuals is slightly better than the one for the automatic cars. Based on these curves, the manuals lose on average $7,000 per year and the automatics $8,600 per year. So by looking to the curves and the numbers, one could conclude that the manuals hold a value better than the automatic cars. Now if we look a bit closer at the data, then we can see though that this conclusion is a bit premature. You can see namely that the curve for the manual lays higher due to these cars at the top end of the price range. And as I mentioned earlier, these are the ones with an extremely low mileage. It is then also so that due to these cars, the manual market segment has a lower median mileage than the automatic one. And if we correct for these outliers, there would be no significant difference in depreciation. And this is something which you often see since the introduction of the PDK box. Because this is so good, the manuals don't demand a premium anymore. If we move on then to the generation split, then we can see that there are clear price differences. A 991.1 tends to be $26.6 thousand cheaper than a 991.2. And a 997.2 tends to be again $24,000 cheaper than a 991.1. You can also see that there seems to be a small bottom in the 991.2 market and that the 997.2 seems to be fully bottomed out. I would then also say that now seems to be a good moment to enter the 997.2 market. But you need to be a little bit careful with attaching conclusions to the curves what you see now on the screen. For each generation, we namely only have a few model years available. And this means that the actual depreciation values might fluctuate. And with that being said, let's have a look at the last segmentation, which is the market split by roof type. Here we can see that the Targa is of course the most expensive car of the bunch and also depreciates the most at a rate of $16.8 thousand per year. It is by the way interesting to note that there's only one new Targa for sale over here, and this car is priced at $180,000. So the actual rate for a Targa might be higher than what we see in the graph over here. When it comes to the coupes and cabriolets, then we can't really see a difference between them. But also here, we need to be a bit careful with interpreting these curves. There are namely only a few cars for sale in the cabriolet and Targa segment, and that again means that the numbers might fluctuate. So now you're up to date on the depreciation per year for the GTS market. And that means that it's time to have a look at the depreciation per 1,000 miles driven, but we will go through this a little quicker. The depreciation per 1,000 miles graph is now appearing on your screen. And you can see that we have now the mileage on the horizontal axis instead of the model year. And you can see that there are only a few new GTSs for sale. This model will of course soon be replaced by the 992. Now when it comes to the mileages, you have a wide variety of choices, as they stretch up all the way to 50,000 miles. Now on average, you will lose around $1.3 thousand per 1,000 miles driven. For the used cars though, this is slightly lower at a rate of $1.1 thousand per 1,000 miles. Now just as with the depreciation per year, I checked various market splits, but I didn't really find any interesting differences. So let's move on to the next step. The step you're probably most curious about. You namely know now all the ins and outs of the GTS market and how it behaves relative to the mileage and the model year. And that means that we can start to compare it to some other cars, and more specifically, some other 911s. I namely think that the GTS is, value-wise, one of the smartest purchases you can make if you are shopping for a 911. In general, I think that the people who are in the market for a GTS can roughly be put in two categories. The first category contains the people who are in the market for a base or S version of the 911, but might consider to go for the GTS as it offers more performance. The second category contains the people who are in the market for a GTS, but might also consider a GT3 or a turbo. After all, one could argue that the turbo is the ultimate daily supercar, and the GT3 is obviously more track focused. The GTS of course falls right in the middle. And the depreciation comparison for all of those cars is appearing now on your screen. You can see that we have the base version, the S version, the GTS, the GT3 and the turbo. Now if we start at the bottom with the S and the base, then you can see that the premium which you initially pay for the S version fades away when the car ages. I already talked about this many times on my channel, and you can see then also that for the older cars, the premium you pay for the S is very small. Now when we look at the GTS, then we can see something interesting. You can see namely that the new price of a GTS is only slightly higher than the one for a S. And when we follow the depreciation curve, we can see that the GTS holds its value better than a S, and that for model year 2011, the gap between the S and the GTS is a lot larger than the gap between the S and the base version. I do think then also that, especially when you're shopping for a car which is 2 to 3 years old, a GTS offers extremely good value for money. You can see that for those years, the prices are almost identical to the high-spec S versions, but that the depreciation is a lot lower. So if you are debating between an S or GTS, I would have a serious look at the GTS. But what if you fall in the other category and you're trying to decide between a turbo, GT3 or GTS? Then the story is slightly different. First, we can see that from new, a GT3 or turbo is a lot more expensive. So if you are in the market for a new car or one that is 1 or 2 years old, the GTS is value-wise the smarter choice. Now in the case that you don't mind an older car, the story becomes more nuanced. You can see namely that the premium for a GT3 and turbo fades away quickly when a car ages, and that after around 5 to 6 years, the depreciation curves line up with the one of the GTS. And looking purely at the values, I do think then also that you can expect more or less the same depreciation pattern. It becomes more a question whether or not you're willing to spend the extra $30,000 to $50,000 to go for a GT3 or turbo. Alternatively, you can opt to go for a high mileage GT3 or turbo, as those prices are extremely close to the GTS's ones. Nevertheless, I think that the depreciation curve of the GTS is quite impressive when you compare it to these other models. And this goes especially for the comparison to the turbo and the GT3. These cars are namely said to depreciate relatively little, but as you can see from the graph, it is actually the GTS which is performing the best over here. Now I already did full analysis on the turbo, the GT3 and the other 911 models. So if you're interested in those, then I recommend that you check out my channel. I will also put a link down below in the description of the video so you can find them easy. Now before we wrap up this video, I still want to show you one more thing. And that is how the GTS compares to all of the other cars which I've analyzed on this channel. And like always, I'm going to do this with the depreciation leaderboard. This leaderboard namely shows on the horizontal axis the cars and on the vertical axis the relative depreciation rate for each car. If we find the GTS, then we can see that it ranks in the middle of the leaderboard with a rate of 5.6%. And when you compare this rate to the other cars which have the same age, then you will find that it is slightly better. Now I checked the same graph, but then for the depreciation per 1,000 miles driven, and over there the GTS also scored somewhere in the middle. And with that piece of information in the pocket, let's conclude. After all of those numbers, you probably have a good idea as to what the conclusion will be. We namely saw in the various graphs that the depreciation curve of a GTS is quite good. Therefore, if you are in the market for a Carrera S, I would definitely consider a GTS. The premium which you will pay is relatively small, but the depreciation curve looks a lot better. It is however key to mention that this doesn't go for every GTS in the market. You need to find one which has a good price to model year to mileage ratio. After all, if you overpay for the car in the first place, your depreciation will be high. And with that being said, we arrived at the end of the video. Now if you enjoyed this video, please remember to support the channel by smashing that like button. Also remember that you can comment a car for which you would like to see an analysis down below in the comment section. Don't forget then to subscribe and to smash the notification bell so you get actually notified when your requested analysis goes live. As always, a huge thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a fresh analysis.